Welcome to Purdue University College of Science Superheroes of Science podcast. I'm Stephen.
And I'm Sarah. We will be discussing anything and everything related to the science classroom and interviewing scientists.
Because as we know, scientists are the superheroes behind the science.
So join us as we learn about the scientists and explore current trends in K-12 science education. We are here with Professor David Eichinger from the Department of Curriculum and Instruction here at Purdue University. Thank you for meeting with us, David.
Oh, thank you.
All right, simple background things. First of all, what do you do? All right, your curriculum instruction. You're the biology man. When it comes to teaching biology, you're the man.
Well, I'm one of two people actually on campus right now. Since 1991, when I came here to Purdue, until about 5 years ago, I was the only faculty member who was officially working in the area of biology education, especially with biology teacher education. Since then, Dr. Seljan Guzi has joined the faculty of the Department of Curriculum Instruction and the Department of Biological Sciences. So like me, she has a joint appointment in education and in biology.
I've been here since 1991 in basically teaching teachers how to teach biology.
Mm-hmm.
What are some trends? Can you think of trends in biology education or just elementary education applies biology that you're seeing coming through, positive trends in education now?
Okay. A couple of positive trends. Well, trends, and I think they're positive. One of the things that I've seen in the world of biology that has changed, and that this has a direct impact on the world of biology teaching too, is in the field of biology, there's been a real shift to more and more of the cellular and molecular level of understanding the biological world. To some extent at the expense of a focus on the macroscopic world, meaning looking at the biological world at the level of ecosystems, or looking at the biological world at the level of organisms, entire organisms.
Okay.
A lot more of the cutting edge research that's being done in biology is now focused at the cellular level and even smaller than that, the molecular level. So a lot of the CRISPR work, the genetic modification and things like that that's going on, that's all happening at the very microscopic level.
Oh, wow.
So that's a research or the field of biology trend. And then what I'm seeing is that there's a parallel shift in emphasis on what's being taught, especially at the high school level, I think. Mm-hmm. Away from the organismal biology or the ecosystem levels of biology, and more emphasis being put on the cellular and molecular levels. I think to some extent that has to happen in the schools too, because we're hoping that the information that students are learning is parallel to some of the new information that's coming out of biological research as it's being done by professional biologists. What troubles me a little bit is losing that emphasis or that focus on the macroscopic level of the biological world. That happens to be one of my favorite parts of biology. And so I've got a personal stake in this too, in addition to a professional stake in this. But I'm really convinced that both as biologists but also as biology teachers, if we don't understand what's happening at the macroscopic level, it makes it really hard. It makes it harder to understand what's going on at the microscopic level.
That's what I was thinking when you first started saying that. If you kind of need that foundation of understanding to understand how it works smaller.
I think so. And my experience as a teacher is that when I start teaching the biology classes for the elementary education majors, we always start at the macroscopic level. We start with ecosystems. And then we progressively work our way down into the smaller and smaller levels of biological organization. Mm-hmm. And I think the macroscopic level gives students a foundation for understanding some important concepts, like you said, but it's also, the macroscopic world is something that we're interacting with visibly and tangibly every single day of our lives.
Yeah.
It's a part of our everyday lives, if we kind of open our eyes and notice that it's there. Mm-hmm. The cellular and the molecular world, they're of course parts of our lives, but they're not as visible, they're not as tangible, they're not as easily accessible. They're kind of imaginary for a lot of students, I've found.
I can see that being abstract.
Very abstract.
With it being that abstract, do you think that students are going to still be as interested in biology, Or is it a little too abstract so they're not catching the interest as well as before?
I'm not concerned that they'll be losing interest in biology because it's abstract. There's so much of biology that is abstract. In fact, if you look at the ecosystem level, right, the macroscopic level, we talk about food chains and food webs and energy transfer between organisms at different trophic levels, from producers to consumers and decomposers. Well, those energy transfers, some of it is, claw and tooth kinds of things, predators consuming prey. But a lot of the energy transfer that we refer to is abstract. It's happening at the cellular level. It's all about cellular respiration. So I still think there's a place for and a need for some of those abstract concepts. I'm not concerned that as we're moving more and more to the cellular and molecular, that abstract component of the biology world is going to turn students off. The challenge becomes for teachers then, with something so abstract and so invisible in many respects, how do we make it real for our students? Mm-hmm. It's relatively easy to take students out to a natural environment and show them predator and prey interactions. You can see the results of decomposition with leaves that are rotting on the ground and the dead raccoon on the side of the road and things like that, right? That's right there in front of your eyes. And so those kinds of real world connections are a little bit easier to help students see. What becomes more challenging for all of us as teachers then is, with these more abstract levels of understanding the biological world, how can we keep our students connected to that? Okay. How can we come up with real world examples? Medicine provides a really nice way of doing that. Mm-hmm. We're all concerned about our health, and so understanding the human body as one aspect of the biological world, even at the cellular and possibly at the molecular level, is a way that we can use that natural connection, students' interest in their health overall, and say, oh, you know what, if you want to better understand health and disease, you have to know something about anatomy and physiology. To understand that, you have to know something about the organs and the organ systems, what they are and how they work. And to understand those, you have to understand the cells that make them up. And then you have to understand the metabolic processes that are happening in those cells too. So it might take a few more steps to help them see the connections from my body and my health all the way down to what's happening at a molecular level in my cells. But I still think it's approachable. I still think it's tangible. It just takes some more creative approaches on the parts of teachers to help students see those connections.
Do your pre-service teachers that you work with, your elementary teachers, what are some ideas that they have come up with or that you have seen with this? Because I agree, I think it does take some creative approaches. Mm-hmm. Have you been a part of seeing that, what they've come up with?
Well, I don't see so much what they come up with in their own classrooms. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
What I see much more directly are the kinds of learning opportunities, the lab experiences, for example, that we try to offer here on campus that are targeted specifically to future elementary teachers.
Okay.
I know enough about the world of elementary science teaching to be kind of dangerous. I have a sense for what happens in elementary classrooms and the challenges that teachers face specifically in elementary levels with teaching science. Knowing a little bit about that, then when I try to teach science here on campus to future elementary teachers, I try to take that knowledge about what our graduates are likely to encounter when they get to their own classrooms. And what can we do here on campus when we're teaching them science, not teaching them how to teach science. That's a separate course that they'll take with another professor later. Okay. But when we teach them science classes here, what can we do to help them as learners better understand the biology that we're trying to help them understand? But while we're doing that, how can we model through teaching techniques, through the use of particular materials, through certain kinds of laboratories, through collaborative learning situations? What can we model while our university students are going through our classes here that they might take from their experience here at the university and think when they get their first full-time job? Now, I remember some biology classes I took at Purdue, and I enjoyed those classes. I hope they're saying this. And what was it that they were doing? What were we doing as learners in that class that made it so enjoyable? Can I do some of that in my own class now? Granted, I'm working with a different age group, a different grade level of students, But were there some aspects of the learning process, were there some aspects of the teaching approaches that were used in that university level class that now I can take and translate into something that's going to be usable at the elementary school level?
I really like how you talk, because I think as a teacher, I think all teachers have been students in a class.
Yes.
And as students, you know what you know what you've seen modeled for you. So I think this is a very powerful way to sort of teach by example, lead by example,
Right.
for them to have that knowledge. So that I agree. So do you have a favorite example of something that you use that you think, oh, I really like when we do this part of the course?
I have an example from the spring semester, Biology 206, that I like using here because I see that it's an effective teaching tool for us here at the university. But having been around the block and teaching this biology course for a few years, when students graduate from our program here, they will often contact me when they get to their first full-time job, and they'll say, I was a former student, I remember that we did this activity about genetics, and it was all about these imaginary organisms called rebobs. And could you send me the lab packet materials that we used when we were students in your class so that I can try to adapt this to use in my elementary school classroom? And so the example is when we're trying to teach genetics, traditionally biologists have used organisms to try to help students understand how traits are passed from one generation of organisms to the next, from the parents to the offspring to the next generation, and so on. And traditionally, one of the organisms that's been used by biologists are fruit flies. There's a historical background to using fruit flies. They're organisms that are often easy to use. You can purchase them from supply companies. But that organism might work better at either a high school level or a university level biology class. They're kind of hard to manipulate. They're very small. You have to knock them out so that you can look at the traits that are present in each of the generations. You have to be very careful when you're breeding them so that you don't get accidental crosses between organisms that you don't want to get because you're trying to control the crosses. So for higher level students, that might be a really appropriate model organism to use. For elementary, that's really not going to work for a whole bunch of reasons. So why not find a different model organism, even an imaginary model organism? One that's made out of marshmallows and toothpicks and thumbtacks and tiny nails, but that can still be an organism that can show how traits are passed from two parents that have these particular traits, how those traits are passed to the next generation of organisms and then to the next generation of organisms. These are organisms that are imaginary, so you don't have to worry about literally raising them or growing colonies of these things. They're made with household materials. You can buy everything that you need at the grocery store. Your students can actually build these organisms, and while they're building the organisms, they include the particular trait that you're trying to help them understand. So there's all kinds of hands-on ways that students can learn about genetics by using this imaginary organism. When we teach it here at the university level, we teach monohybrid crosses, so a single trait from parents to the next two generations. We also use this same organism to teach about dihybrid crosses, so two traits simultaneously. You can use this same organism to teach about sex-linked traits, so baldness or colorblindness or whatever it might be. So depending upon how far you want to go in the world of genetics, this model organism is really flexible and really adaptable to teaching it. And I know that our graduates have used this model organism with students as young as first or second grade, all the way up through upper elementary and into middle school. And high school teachers will use this as well too. So it's a very adaptable kind of thing. So the long story short is that you asked for an example of something that we do here that hopefully will impact our students while they're learners here, but that they can then use in the future as teachers when it comes their turn to be teaching that topic. And that's one of my favorite things to do. Our students get very excited about these rebobs. That's the name that's given to the imaginary organisms. In part because they literally do build them, and then all of a sudden that becomes my rebob. I built it. I gave it the traits that it has. Well, I was told what traits it's supposed to have because I looked at the chromosomes that are telling me which genetic information it has. But then I put that together. There's a sense of ownership of an imaginary marshmallow and toothpick organism that somehow becomes, transformed into something that, wow, I did this myself. Mm-hmm. That, for me, is one of those personal connections that we were talking about just a minute ago. Mm-hmm. For a very abstract idea like genetics, it's all happening at the chromosomal or the molecular level. But can we find a way that we can make this more tangible, something that students can relate to that still emphasizes the most important concepts about genetics that we want them to learn? Not all the details. You can't use REBOPs to teach all the details of genetics. Mm-hmm. Maybe fruit flies are a better organism for doing something like that. But given the teachers that we're working with, given the students that they will work with in the future, let's find an appropriate model, and then let's use that as a teaching tool while they are students here with us on campus.
I really like that in those classes, one thing you mentioned, that you're teaching them the science, but you're doing it in a way in which you're modeling what would be a good instructional practice for them.
Yes.
And I wish that we had more classes that was as effective at doing that as what I've seen yours be.
Yeah.
Are you still doing like the ecosystem tanks?
Yes, we're getting started with the model ecosystem tanks.
I see those in classrooms.
Yes.
And it's like, I know where those ideas came from.
Yes.
It's awesome. I'm like, this is awesome. People have done that. You've modeled that for them. They've adapted and they're using it in their classrooms all over.
Yeah.
I think that's just an awesome attribute of your classes, that you're making sure you're keeping them not only the content they need, but you're keeping it in a way in which teachers can use later.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think our content courses, even content for education people, the instructors oftentimes are kind of focused on just making sure they teach the content, but not necessarily teaching it in a best practice way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not quite keeping up with best practice. They're doing like primarily lecture still, unfortunately, and not doing it in modeling in a way that's going to help that teacher later.
Yeah.
And so that's one way that you are definitely well above the bar on there, and it's outstanding.
Well, thank you, but I'm really fortunate because I've had experience as a teacher myself. So I've been there. I know what it's like. I faced the challenges that lots of teachers face on how to make this stuff real for our students. I have a background, a bachelor's degree in biology, so I'm dangerous with my knowledge of biology, meaning I know enough to be dangerous with that, but I'm constantly learning new stuff about biology too. I think that's what we do as teachers anyways. We try to increase our own understanding. I'm also fortunate because I've been given an opportunity here at Purdue to have this appointment in both education and in biology. And so my job here is to work with future teachers, and in the case of the elementary teachers, help them better understand biology. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the biology majors who want to go on and become high school biology teachers, it was, at the time I was doing the methods, it was helping them better understand the pedagogy or the teaching aspects of things. But to be able to bridge the two worlds of education and science in a formal kind of a way, but also on a day-to-day basis, and working with the student audiences that I have a chance to work with here, I mean, that to me is like the best of both worlds. I can't think of a better situation, given my own love of science, my own love of teaching, and then my own desire to help share some of those loves with people who are going to be teachers too. This is a great place to do it.
The last couple of years I was teaching, I was fortunate to get some student teachers who were just wonderful people. And what I loved about having student teachers was the new ideas that they brought in. Mm-hmm. And I thought, gosh, I've been teaching for a while and I haven't really been in contact with a lot of other chemistry teachers, maybe once a year at Hasty or something, which is our Indiana Association of Science Teachers convention. But do you have advice seeing these for teachers that have been teaching, let's say 5-10 years, that maybe are interested in, I need to update a little bit, I need to think about some new ideas or maybe new best practices, maybe new ways of teaching something, but I'm just not sure where to get started or what resources. Do you know, would you have any suggestions for teachers?
Well, I think to just kind of echo some of the things that you just said, if they've never hosted a student teacher before, consider it. Mm-hmm. Those of us at the university, we're always looking for classroom teachers who are willing to work with us and help to host a student teacher. I know that's is a challenge because you're working with someone coming from the university who's unproven in terms of their teaching abilities. But as teachers, we all have to start somewhere.
Right.
We all desperately need that first opportunity to get our feet wet. And the best place to do that is to go work more or less full time with an experienced mentor. Mm-hmm. And I think an awful lot of teachers maybe are thinking, well, I don't know if I would be a good mentor or not. Well, I bet you could be if you're going into the supervision of student teachers, hosting a student teacher for the right reasons. But when you do that, you can't help but be challenged by or start thinking about your own practice, because you're being challenged, not challenged in a bad way, but you're being exposed to new ideas from this green teacher, green or wet behind the ears, who's coming from the university, who's full of these wonderful ideas, needs an opportunity to practice them. You're someone, as a hosting teacher, who's had years of experience, but you're hungry for new ideas. What a perfect combination of people who can help each other. I mean, that's a symbiotic relationship, to use a biology term.
I like that.
A perfect symbiotic relation. It's a win-win situation. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not brand new teaching ideas, to have somebody else in your classroom hopefully will help you step back and reflect on your own practice. As you watch somebody else teach, I know this happens to me all the time. When I'm watching others teach, I have to step back and say, oh, I never thought of doing it that way before. I wonder why she did it that way. And then following it up and having an opportunity to say, I thought that was a fabulous idea. What inspired you to think of doing it that way, or using that example? And so, just interacting with fellow teachers, no matter their levels of experience, conventions, joining professional organizations, those are really good ideas too. But on a day-to-day basis, if you can have somebody in your classroom in that kind of a mentor-mentee relationship, I think it also challenges you and pushes you to think about your teaching in some ways that you might not otherwise have a chance to do.
I like that.
One other quick and easy one, if you're not going to host a student teacher, is I know scheduling at the schools, especially the middle school and high school level, can be challenging, elementary too. Is there any way that you can go and visit another teacher's classroom while they're teaching science? Mm-hmm. Just ask if you can sit in for 30 minutes. And maybe be an assistant, but I think the best idea is just be a fly on the wall. Just watch. And again, watching somebody else while they're doing that hopefully will help you reflect on, again, I had never thought of doing it that way. That's a really cool idea. And then borrowing some of those ideas, thanking the author of those ideas, but saying, do you mind if I try something like this in my classroom, and then give it a whirl and see if it works. We're all unique as teachers. So if I watch you do something in your classroom and it's really cool, I might try to do that same thing. I might try to replicate it in my classroom. There's no guarantee that it'll work because you did it, you do it your way, you have your students and their personalities and your chemistry in your classroom personalities and so on. My classroom's going to be a little bit different, but why not try? Why not experiment with your teaching a little bit? And that's a good place to start to get some inspiration, is from your fellow teachers. They're right next door. They're right down the hall.
Hey, I still want to know your background and you.
Yes, I do too.
Because I want to know how you got where you are today.
Yeah.
What you said, bachelor's in biology, and so how did you end up here teaching? Okay. And why did you choose biology as a bachelor's?
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Good question. I'll take that in a positive way. So, first of all, in my family, I am one of 5 boys that grew up together. And my dad, by training, was a chemist. And so I think just every single day we were exposed to science things. He always encouraged us as kids to go outside. We lived in a somewhat rural area, so we could get outside and explore things. And he was also a salesperson for chemicals, industrial chemicals and industrial chemical supplies. And so he'd come home with these catalogs that sold glass tubing and little torches and stuff like that. And we would say, hey, Dad, we're interested in bending glass and stuff. Could we get some and experiment? And he was very willing to allow us to explore with that kind of stuff. So as a child growing up, I had opportunities, thanks to my parents, to really be interested in science on a day-to-day basis. I had some fabulous teachers throughout my educational career. Shout out to, she's no longer with us, I'm sure, but Mrs. Hahn in 5th grade. Mr. Weber in 7th grade, Mr. Hosey in 10th grade, and Mr. Deviney in 12th grade. These were teachers, science teachers, elementary and then science teachers, middle school and high school, who just were absolutely inspirational. And they just kind of fueled the fire for me of loving science and helping me think that that might be something I want to do after graduating from high school. So I went off to college. I was at a small liberal arts college that didn't require us to declare a major until the end of our sophomore year. And they wanted us to explore during those first 2 years and figure out what was going to be the most appropriate major for us.
Okay.
I ended up going in two, what some people might call diametrically opposed directions. An English major or a biology major.
Oh, well.
I had fabulous classes and professors in both of those directions. I was really intrigued by literature and the way that it kind of helped open up some worlds that I'd not been exposed to before. But then I continued my love of biology too. And so I got to the end of my sophomore year and I had to make a decision. I wasn't going to double major. That wasn't going to happen, but I had to make a choice. And I ended up doing biology in part because I thought that there might be some more career opportunities that I saw easier paths to get to than the English major path. So I earned my bachelor's degree in biology, and then I was trying to figure out what do I do with this, and I ended up joining the Peace Corps, the American Volunteer Organization, and I was assigned to be a high school biology and chemistry teacher in a very rural school in the middle of Central Africa. I ended up working in a country that was called Zaire at the time. It's now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I was the science teacher at this school setting there, with hundreds of kids. And so I had the responsibility straight out of my undergraduate bachelor's degree in biology, with no formal training in education, other than the teachers who had taught me. Now I was supposed to be a teacher of biology and chemistry. No offense, but chemistry has never been my forte. But suddenly I was supposed to be a teacher of this subject too. Long story short there, I found out that I loved teaching. That was my first opportunity to do it formally. And I enjoyed doing it, but I also found out that I was somewhat effective in doing it. But as a result of that, when I finished my Peace Corps experience, I came back to the U.S. and my first thought was, I want to become a high school biology teacher. I tried to get into an alternative licensure program at the time. I won't name any institutions, but they weren't really receptive to letting someone like myself with just a science degree and no formal teaching experience, no formal teaching background, pick up a teaching license very quickly. They wanted me to basically do another undergraduate major in education. And I said, that's not what I'm willing to do. What if, instead of being a classroom biology teacher, what if I thought about being a teacher of teachers of biology? So I ended up getting my master's degree and my PhD in teacher education, specifically in science education, at Michigan State University. And that led me to look at the position that was here advertised at Purdue starting in 1991.
Oh, wow.
And the thing that really attracted me was the fact that they wanted a faculty member who would be both in education and in biology. And so I would teach education courses and I would teach biology courses, and it was all targeted towards people who were preparing to be future teachers too. So it seemed like the perfect fit. What better position could I possibly look for? And so over the years, I've figured out ways, both in the education courses and in the biology courses, of making improvements. And that's the other thing. As teachers, I think we have to be willing to say, I've done that thing for a number of years and it's still not working. Rather than repeat it again, let's step back and try to figure out what's not working with that. Can it be fixed? If it can't, let's find something else to replace it.
But that is a hard thing as a teacher to hear.
It's a very hard thing to do.
I mean, in the classroom, I'm telling you, you think, but I don't have time. I know this, and I know I can cover it and check that box. And if the kids don't get it.
But what we for years have always told teachers, ever since I've been here, is 10%, right? The 10% rule. Plan on changing 10% every year, and you're always growing. But don't try to change more than that, or you're sinking because it's just too much. You're in over your head. That's something we've told teachers for years.
So as a teacher, I'm listening to this and I think, I know you're right. I know I need to do this. It's not working. This whatever topic that I teach, I know it's not working. and I don't know if I can do it.
But you look for the resources. So
Okay.
others, more experienced teachers who can be mentors, who can help you. You ask your administration, whether it's in the K-12 environment or here at the university environment, you ask for opportunities, support for opportunities for professional development, and you
Okay.
get involved in those. And then you don't bite off more than you can chew. You
Yeah.
be reasonable in your own expectations with how much you can change at a time. But like you said, if you keep chipping away at this over a period of time, you're going to, after 10 years, guess what? You come back around to where you started.
There you go.
And now, if it hasn't already dawned on you, you know that thing I changed 10 years ago? I'm ready to change it again.
Yep.
You keep chipping away.
I like that. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to our podcast.
If you love Superheroes of Science, be sure to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or your preferred podcast player. Be sure to join us as we add interviews of scientists and incorporate discussions of current trends in K-12 science.
Until next time, be super, and remember, you are someone's hero. Boiler up.
Hammer down.